Hello friends, welcome to UGC EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Rajneesh Ranjan, disaster management expert and VP SkyMet. Today I am going to discuss about the module capacity building interventions for disaster resilience. The rationale behind this module is that this provides a conceptual understanding of capacity building. The capacity building and development is the key indicator of disaster reduction efforts worldwide. A contextual approach of CBD would greatly enable better response, recovery and mitigation of disaster risks. This module aims to introduce focused and contextual capacity building interventions as key components of building disaster resilience. The main learning objectives of this module is to get you acquainted with the concept of capacity development and disaster resilience. To understand the interventions of capacity development in order to comprehend the rationale behind investing in CBD and to recognize stakeholders for CBD, that is capacity building and development. To connect capacity development with disaster resilience and disaster risk reduction, and to understand the steps to design the capacity development interventions focusing on DRR, that is disaster risk reduction. So now let's start with the main unit 1, that is capacity building interventions and disaster resilience. Friends, diverse group of individuals in shared geographical area having common interests linked by dynamic socio-economic interactions and engaging in collective action is termed as community. Community boundaries are difficult to draw as smaller communities could be nested within larger communities. Thus, the idea of the community is a multi-layered notion and defined on a case-to-case basis as depicted by Sharifi in 2016. The ability of the community to manage their affairs, including their development, is termed as capacity. During the time of stress, example, physical manifestation of any natural hazard, the ability of the community to utilize its inherent capacities to respond to the stress in order to minimize adverse impacts is termed as the adaptive capacity of the community. Capacity building or development is the locally driven change process by means of which individuals or the communities obtain, strengthen, maintain and adapt their capacities to set and achieve their own developmental objectives over time with incremental learning. Though both the term capacity building and capacity development are used interchangeably, a difference recognized in academics is that in capacity building, new initiatives are taken to create knowledge, skills and attitude, that is KSA, and to create a new culture of prevention, preparedness and mitigation, especially in the field of disaster risk management. While capacity development is the effort to strengthen the existing capacities among the stakeholders. Friends, when we talk about the necessity of capacity building and capacity development, the individual capacity development intervention is about the general well-being of an individual and the development of his or her abilities to keep her or himself sustainably in the state of well-being, whereas the capacity development in disaster management is for the community, though it starts at the individual level. The ability of the community to better respond to, recover from and prevent further such disastrous event is the focus of capacity development for disaster management. In respect to disaster resilience, the aim of the capacity building is to achieve certain determined outcomes and bring about changes that help communities to be resilient to risks from various hazards. Disaster resilience implies learning from the event that caused severe disruptions, altering the adaptive capacities and utilizing transformative approaches leading to long-term incremental evolution of the community that reduces risks associated with disasters. Friends, let's talk about the capacity development in disaster management sector. In order to adapt communities to cope up changes, several international and national political agreements have been achieved. These includes Sustainable Development Goals, that is SDGs, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-30. In addition, 3 World Conferences on Disaster Risk Reduction, the Yokohama Summit resulting in the Yokohama Strategy, the Kobe Conference resulting in the Hyogo Framework for Action, and the Sendai Conference resulting in the Sendai Framework have identified capacity development as an important step towards the reduction of disaster losses globally, as proposed by Hagelstein and Budke in 2016. Capacity development must enable the most marginalized to represent and defend their interests more effectively, not only in their immediate context but also globally. Capacity development for DRR encompasses institutional or organizational development to handle different aspects of disaster risk reduction, including stress or changes. It must not restrict to training, as providing training only contributes little to changing realities, especially of the marginalized population. The development of an idea of human capital is synchronous to capacity development and exceeds training awareness to also include the means to achieve objectives, results utilizing institutions, and thereby enable people to act according to the training received or heightened awareness generated. Capacity building is thus more of an approach. Friends, while we discuss about the investment in capacity building for DRR, which is a very important topic, versus the investment in development, one major challenge faced by agencies with regards to investment in capacity building for DRR is the half-life period of disaster memory. Immediately post-disaster events, there is extensive media coverage, but as time passes, media coverage reduces and the memory of the disaster fades away, especially among the potential donors. Post-immediate relief stage face immediate developmental issues like loss of access to water, electricity, housing, which takes central stage, and communities and responding agencies face challenges to raise funds for disaster management and capacity building funding. Half-life memory for major disasters is less than 2 generations even among the affected community. Less severe events are forgotten in less than 3 years. Thus, investing in disaster risk management where hazards are infrequent and uncertain is a major struggle for responding agencies compared to the funding potential for investment in developmental related issues that are more urgent, visible and frequent. Further, there is also doubt regarding the extent to which capacity building intervention visualize effectiveness in reducing disaster risk. Post 2001 Bhuj earthquake in Gujarat, records are available of over $1.7 billion expenditure on the targeted capacity building interventions. But after many decades, the question is still unanswered whether the area is safer to earthquake hazards, probably until the another earthquake occurs, as proposed by Tiwari in 2015. Now let us understand about the stakeholders in capacity building interventions. Friends, the key stakeholders in the entire process of capacity building include the governmental, non-governmental, international, national and community organizations. The following figure shows the key outcomes of capacity building measures at various stages in a nation. For effective disaster management, the national level stakeholders must focus on designing policies, guidelines and initiation of research activities to find out the scope of interventions. The state level stakeholders must aid in effective implementation of the capacity development process, and usually help funding for the activities and local context research activities. The district level or the urban local body stakeholders know better what are the developmental gaps pertaining to disaster risk reduction and thereby must be in a position to identify the exact requirement. The village level or local institution level stakeholders must be in a position to utilize the funding and mobilize the interventions into sustainable capacity developmental interventions for disaster risk assessment. The individual level attention is focused where the capacity addition or building must bear fruits of heightened awareness to risks, risk mitigation mechanism and emergency preparedness. The National Disaster Management Authority NDMA, State Disaster Management Authority SDMA and the District Disaster Management Authority DDMA must play important roles in the design and operation of the entire interventions. NDMA has the function of laying down guidelines for different ministries and departments for integrating measures for the prevention and mitigation of disasters and its respect as well as for mainstreaming DRR in developmental planning. Further recommendations for funds, provision for mitigation and taking measures for capacity building are the functions of NDMA as per the Disaster Management Act 2005. SDMA functions as the authority of laying guidelines for departments of the government of the state and also take review of measures for capacity building intervention by the departments and issues guidelines as necessary. DDMA plays key role in the capacity development. It functions reviewing the state of capacities for responding to disasters and provides direction to relevant departments or authorities at the district level for upgradation. It also has the functions to organize and coordinate training programs for officials, employees and voluntary rescue workers in districts as well as facilitating community trainings and awareness programs for the prevention of disaster with the support of local authorities, government and non-governmental organizations, along with the setting up, review, maintenance and upgradation of mechanism for early warning systems and dissemination of proper information to public. As per the Disaster Management Act 2005, DDMAs are empowered and are mainly responsible for capacity building activities in our nation. Let us talk about the capacity for disaster risk reduction initiative promotes the concept of capacities in three levels. At the individual level, this pertains to the knowledge, skills and attitude of individuals that allows them to perform certain tasks aimed towards disaster risk reduction. These capacities are acquired through education, training by various agencies, learning experience by virtue of associated work or by interaction with those who have undergone formal trainings, education and by coaching, mentoring like that. The institution level pertains to the policies, systems or arrangements in place that allow institutions to perform certain tasks towards disaster risk reduction. The enabling environment refers to the existing broader environment that either hampers or facilitates individual and institutional mandate towards disaster risk reduction. It relates to broad policies, legislations, political processes and power relations that govern the functioning of the society towards disaster risk reduction efforts. Interventions are usually designed to target the interaction between individuals and institutions, between institutions, individuals and their environment or interaction of institutions with their surrounding environment. Capacities are also divided into two parts. Technical, which involves capacities associated with particular needs or sectors. For example, this might include urban search and rescue or responding to chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear hazards. And second one is functional, They are cross-cutting and are not associated with a particular sector. These are enablers like leadership, skill and attitude for coordination and empathy towards the affected communities. A thorough understanding of the current state is a prerequisite for effective capacity development intervention. Thus, a proper post-disaster needs assessment is a prerequisite for designing capacity building intervention. Let us come over to Unit 2 of this module, that is designing capacity building intervention for disaster risk reduction. Capacity for managing and preventing disasters depends on how disasters are defined or understood. Disaster management cuts across many sectors and requires additional or redundant capacities to coordinate, respond and sustain capacity post-disaster event. Disaster management activities require the coordination between public works, land use, early warning, environmental management, water resource management, geology, emergency response, etc. The shift from reactive to proactive approach to disaster management could bring about changes in the targeted approach towards capacity development. The essential steps in capacity development includes focus on current situation, that is analysis of contextual interventions. The rationale for intervention includes SWOT analysis segregated into internal and external, positive and negative factors in order to understand what are the factors that could affect the intervention and its desired outcome. For example, starting a literacy class for females in an area that has great difference in literacy between men and women without first understanding why more women are illiterate compared to men may be counterproductive. First, understanding the community and the context would greatly aid capacity building interventions. Next one is stakeholders analysis, including the categorization of stakeholders into beneficiaries whose interests are served by the intervention, decision makers who makes key decisions regarding the intervention, and the implementers who operationalize the project activities and realizes the purpose goal. And another one is financer who make arrangements for funding their intervention. The categorization must also involve the identification of experts and the basis of determining expertise and relevant knowledge, as well as identification of advocacy agents who might not participate directly but would help in providing direction and targeting. Stakeholder categorization would help us to segregate between the providers and the recipients of capacity building and identify individual stakeholder contribution and their strengths and further opportunities. Now, discussing about the situation analysis, this includes the analysis of the necessity for intervention and is important step to the definition of the outcome that the intervention seeks to bring about. The analysis of risk, this requires common understanding of terminologies, concepts among various stakeholders and the values that the intervention brings about to various stakeholders. Prioritization and understanding the hazards, from the routine hazards to the rare hazards, must be analyzed and incorporated in the capacity building interventions. Understanding the vulnerability of the community and the contributing factors increasing vulnerabilities to hazards. Coordination between various stakeholders in understanding the exposure and the at-risk population. Understanding the involvement, roles and responsibilities of various stakeholders, functional, administrative and nominal. Integration of several risk analysis by various stakeholders to arrive at a consensus for disaster risk of the community. Next one is analysis of the capacity to manage risk. Under this comes with an understanding of the disaster risk the community faces, analyzing the current capacity or the system to manage the risk is essential. Capacities include the combination of the strengths, resources available with a community that can be utilized for reducing impacts of the disaster. Capacity also includes the following 9 functions: risk assessment, forecasting, monitoring, impact assessment, prevention and mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, evaluation. These functions are to be analyzed using the following factors. One is legal and institutional frameworks, system of organization, coordination of organization, human and material resources, and likewise. An understanding of the situation would aid in designing capacity building intervention that is likely to be sustainable, acceptable, and adding value to disaster risk reduction efforts for the community. When it is focused on desired situation, the first component is objectives analysis. Under this comes a statement of desired level of risk or reduction of current level of risk, a statement of desired level of performance of existing capacities or increase in the current level of capacities in order to manage the risks at the desired level, outlining the difference between the current situation and the preferred situation, a statement of overall goal, purposes and expected results at 3 stages, forming an objective tree. For example, reduction of seismic risk could include purpose like better building codes, risk conscious construction practice, utilization of quality building materials, and like that. Each purpose could have expected outcomes like coordinated reconnaissance, transfer of knowledge from experts to the masons in both formal and informal practices, training to mason in construction practices suitable to each seismic zone, improvement in monitoring and evaluation of construction practices, and stringent occupation certification by local administration, etc. Plan of activities includes listing activities that require to bring out expected results with clear connections and interdependencies between various activities based on the situation analysis performed and ordering the activities to keep track of the overall objectives. Resource planning. For each listed activities including funding, location, expertise, equipments, etc., the resource planning must also include co-funding by stakeholders and laying controls over the resources for stakeholders and timely allocation. Indicators for measuring success of activities at all levels of objectives, including quality, quantity of individual activity with respect to specific time periods, and comparisons of post-activity performance to pre-activity performance. The indicators must clearly identify what is to be measured, the specific target group, the intended change, and the time frame for the activities and the location of the activities. Internal risk analysis and management. With an understanding of the various factors that could have a negative impact on the activities, the likelihood of such adverse factors occurring, and the likely consequences of materialization of the adverse factors. Analysis of assumptions are mainly the external factors that are uncontrollable to the activities and outcomes and the viability of the intervention, keeping in mind such uncontrollable events. Intervention activities towards achieving outcomes and objectives. To conduct the activities as per plan utilizing allocated resources. Next one is monitoring and evaluation of activities on the basis of identified constraints, indicators and milestones in order to bring about changes if required to the activity or work plan. Friends, let's discuss about the elements of effective capacity building measures. To ensure investment towards capacity building measures addressing disaster risk, the following elements must be considered in the analysis of current situation of the community and also in the desired state of heightened disaster resilience. Terminology. When we talk about terminology, a clear understanding of concepts, definitions and terms related to DRR is required for effective design of capacity development interventions, and like that. All stakeholders involved in the intervention and the respondents must be aware and clear of the terms. In local context, factors that shape and influence capacities and changes occur in the local context. These factors include the political, cultural, social, economic, institutional setups and practices in the community. These factors vary extensively from one community to the other, and thereby vanilla solutions or one size fits all approach for capacity building doesn't exist. The tangible and intangible solutions prevalent in the community where capacity building intervention is undertaken must be understood. The current scenario must be analyzed and the missing points, enablers to reach a state of disaster resilience must be identified in order to have effective design interventions. The DRR capacity development interventions must also be relevant, sustainable with coherence and congruence to the developmental initiatives in the area. Partnerships. In this section, capacity building interventions would require partnerships with various stakeholders. The motives for partnering would decide the purpose and types of partnerships. Capabilities of different partners require careful analysis to decide the scope for collaboration. Exit strategies must be formulated with a specific focus on trust, transparency, shared values, risk and mutual benefits. When we talk about the ownership, apart from the intervening agencies, commitment and active participation of local leaders and actors in the process at all stages, they are vital. This participation adds to the accountability and sustainability of capacity outcomes. Ownership ensures that the intervention is appropriate and demand driven. When we talk about the capacity assessment, this means to answer the following question: whose capacity, for what and how? So, capacity assessment refers to the use of tools, methodologies, approaches for the assessment of capacity of the community and for defining change strategies including DRR components as well as the entry points of the interventions and as analysis of stakeholders and their participation extent to achieve overall goal. It must also be flexible and adaptable to changing conditions and emerging challenges. When we talk about roles and responsibilities, role clarify agreement amongst stakeholders to the tasks and objectives as well as their participation, decision making and accountability, which is an important component of the effective capacity building exercise. Activities and methods. Each stage of capacity building requires careful thought, selection of activities, sequencing and design of steps with a clear strategy to reach from current situation to a scientifically studied better capacity state, including the provisions for adaptability, flexibilities, matching of resources availability, timetable and purpose, objectives of the activities undertaken. Monitoring, evaluation and learning. The DRR targets and effectiveness of capacity building interventions, soft and hard, needs to be defined and measured. Key milestones needs to be identified along with the deliverables for each participant, including their roles, responsibilities, contribution to overall objectives and clarity in the processes, coordination, accountability and future learning. The monitoring capacity of the stakeholders for capacity building interventions must also be considered. Role of donors in capacity development is considered very important. With increasing disaster losses, it is not only the nations that are focusing on capacity development, but also international donor and aid agencies. The role of such donors in capacity development interventions must focus on the following principles: focusing on the long-term disaster risk mitigation efforts, especially for longer-term financing support, investing in global risk indices, risk assessment, communication and monitoring at the global scale to promote unified risk assessment and indices. This provides technical leadership and incentivizing positive behavioral changes, financing projects that enhance local capacities for further capacity development, so that the focus on aid itself is to make aid redundant. Capacity building focusing on the disaster response, recovery, mitigation linkages. External partners play important role in providing legitimacy to local efforts. International agencies that promote capacity building interventions must recognize the social, political and ethical responsibilities of the interventions. The agenda of donor agencies and their downward and horizontal accountability is to be scrutinized and laid clear. The donor must not only gather from their partnering agencies in the geographical location stories and pictures, but must also look into their values, perceptions, concerns and aspirations. Feedback and communication systems must be in a place to have a sense of mutual accountability, not only as a donor recipient system, but also as an agency that is providing sustainable, appropriate and locally accepted capacity development interventions. The interventions must not be mimicry of provisions of previous best practices, but a contextual and appropriate DRR focused capacity development intervention. Capacity development is beyond the transfer of knowledge or technical skills and is more an effort towards finding contextual best fit given particular set of constraints. A new form of emerging international aid is cash on delivery, where demonstrated successful performance by the recipient nations with respect to a specified target are provided financial support. This form of aid for capacity development would be a disruptive innovation for mimicry and would enable contextual interventions focused on achieving a specific, measurable, attainable and realistic and timely results. Friends, now let us summarize the discussion. The ability of the community to manage their affairs, including their development successfully, is termed as capacity. Capacity building or development is the locally driven change process by means of which individuals or the communities obtain, strengthen, maintain and adapt their capacities to set and achieve their own developmental objectives over time with incremental learning. Disaster resilience implies learning from the event that caused severe disruptions, altering the adaptive capacities and utilizing transformative approaches leading to long-term incremental evolution of the community that reduces risks associated with disasters. The development of an idea of human capital is synchronous to capacity development and exceeds training awareness to also include the means to achieve objectives, results, utilizing institutions and thereby enable people to act according to the training received or heightened awareness generated. Key stakeholders in the process of capacity building include the governmental, non-governmental institutions, national and international institutions, NDMA, SDMA, DDMA, etc., which plays important role in the design and operationalization of the interventions. Thus, a proper post-disaster need assessment is a prerequisite for design of capacity building intervention. Capacity for disaster reduction initiative promotes the concept in three levels: individual level, institutional level and enabling environment. Disaster management cuts across many sectors and requires additional or redundant capacities to coordinate, respond and sustain capacity post-disaster event. The interventions must not be mimicry of previous best practices, but a contextual and appropriate DRR focused capacity development interventions must also be taken place. I hope you have understood the concept of capacity building interventions for disaster resilience. See you next time. Thank you.